So, Lindsay, what is your story?
Hey Joe. So with my story, I'm gonna kind of backtrack a little bit so you can get like a bigger picture of how it all happened. A little bit about me. I grew up with a mom who was addicted to opioids, and she struggled with that most of my life. And eventually, she did have an overdose and passed away when I was 23. And then this is kind of where like the story starts coming together. So when I was 23, I was in the military, and I met this guy who was in the shop right next to me. So I was a structural mechanic, and he was an engine mechanic of the same aircraft that we worked on. And he had lost his mom when he was 19, and maybe in 23, like I didn't really have any friends that understand the grief and the pain that comes with losing a parent. So me and this guy kind of trauma bonded over it. I was like having a really hard time trying to get through the grief process, and I called the duty phone one day just to talk to whoever was on the other line. And it happened to be him, so I kind of felt like the universe like brought us together just for this reason.
So, what is that?
And then we,
The what you
hmm?
said, the duty line?
Yeah, so in the military, you have duty sections. So it's just our command. There was always someone watching the phone to take phone calls, and he happened to be the one that was on duty that day.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
So I would just call in to talk to someone because I was just struggling with the grief of everything, and it happened to be him on the other line. So I was like, wow, the universe kind of brought us together for this one. Um, so that's how this story kind of comes together. Is we trauma bonded right away. So from the beginning, our relationship was built on a trauma bond. Um, but anyways, we were together for about 7 years. We got married. We were married for about 3 years, and I trusted this guy fully with my whole heart. This was my best friend. I was ready to spend the rest of my life with this guy. He knew everything about me, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So he wanted to go on a boys' gambling trip one weekend, and I said, why not? I totally trust him. Go have fun with your guys, make us some money. And so he went to the gambling trip, and he came back, and I just kept getting these like weird gut feelings that something was going on, and something told me to look at his messages on his Apple Watch, and there happened to be some really um, like ugly messages on his Apple Watch between him and another dude that he had went to the gambling trip with, and it was basically some really nasty like locker room talk about women that you could pay to come service you. And so I was like, wow, that's a lot to kind of take in. So him and I, we talked about it. He told me that nothing happened. Of course, I didn't believe it, and so that's kind of where like the downward spiral started. Was when I found my husband paying for services from a woman, and so my suicide story starts there because after that, I was in my head spiraling about every single thing. What about when he was over here, when he was doing that? Was he really with another woman? What was really going on? So my suicide actually happened on Cinco de Mayo, 2018. So I had went out with my friends. There's pictures of me with my friends, like smiling and laughing and having such a good time. And like, if you look at these pictures, you would have never thought that after I left them that I would go back home and try to take my life. I kept my smile on. I pretended I was happy and I wasn't broken and shattered because my world just ripped apart. With my husband. So I went out drinking all day with my friends. Of course, we didn't hardly eat anything. There was a lot of tequila, a lot of Coronas. So I think that was a big factor in my suicide attempt because I felt like the alcohol kind of gave me like the courage to actually go through with it. So once I got home that night, I decided to take a bottle of Ambien, which are sleep pills to help you go to sleep.
Hmm.
So I took an entire bottle of Ambien, and then I texted my husband, who was sleeping downstairs for now, and I was still sleeping upstairs. And I told him what I did, and I said, I just can't take the pain anymore, and this is what I did, and goodbye. And last thing I remember is him coming upstairs and busting through the door to ask me, "What did you do?" And then everything kind of went blank from there. So from his point of view, he said that once the medication kicked in, I fell out and I hit my head on the dresser and I was unresponsive. So he called 911. When the ambulance came, they were giving me sternum rubs, which wasn't working. And so they got me, loaded up into the ambulance. They took me straight to the hospital. And I was actually in ICU for 3 days because I wasn't waking up. I was having a hard time breathing on my own. And it was just looking really bad, at the beginning. But after 3 days of, some assistance from machines to help me get back to breathing on my own and, doing normal bodily functions by myself, they put me into a regular room then. And so once I woke up from and I realized what I had did, I never got the therapy or the psychological help that I should have gotten from my attempt, um, because my husband had told the doctor that it was an accident, that I didn't mean to do it. So everyone thought that maybe I accidentally, took the wrong pills or took too many. And so I never got the psychological help that I should have. So once I left that hospital, my life was kind of like in chaos after that. But the
Was
one
it
thing I do,
was it intentional? Sorry to interrupt. Was it intentional on his end um, to tell them that it was accidental, or was he purposely didn't want
I think
them?
maybe it was to protect him because he was still in the military. And if I would have brought the evidence of him paying for sexual services from a woman to his command while being married to me, it could have, jeopardized his entire career and his retirement. And he had already been in for 13 or 14 years. So all of that would have probably went down the drain.
So he was worried about his perception.
That's what I think. I never really had the conversation with him after that. But I think it was to protect him and his, like his the perception of everybody with him, because he was a really good sailor in the military. Like he was a really good sailor on paper. So for someone to come forward with these kind of accusations, just kind of damages his character. So and also he was hanging out with someone who was higher in rank than him. So if I would have brought that to the command too, that they were hanging out, at the gambling trip and stuff, they would have both gotten in trouble for, they call it fraternization, which is, showing kind of
Mhm.
favoritism to people lower in rank.
Right, right, right.
Yeah. So when I woke up from the hospital, my dad called me, and this is the one thing that really stood out to me, is because when I was like so deep in my pain, I wasn't thinking about everybody else and what kind of pain I would have caused them, if this was a successful attempt. So when my dad called me and I answered him, and him hearing the words on the other line, like, "Why did you do that?" It just really like crushed my soul because, you know, then I kind of seen, you know, what would have happened to my friends and my family. Like, I know I was so broken and I just wanted the pain to end and stuff. But I didn't think how my father would feel because I'm his only child if he had to bury me. So that kind of put things in a perspective for me to get my shit together and not do that again. But it would be a lie if I said that I never prepared to do it again, but I did have the ideation of it. I don't know if it's kind of like sick to say in a way, but it's almost like a fantasy, because it's just like that easily I could have just been, pain free and just forget about everything. And, I just wouldn't have to deal with this stuff anymore. But, the,
When you say fantasy, do you mean the fantasy of like you'll no longer have to suffer? So like the fantasy of the escape from the pain? Is that what you mean by fantasy?
yeah, yeah, because I also have bipolar disorder, so my emotions are way more intense than like a normal person. So sometimes when I get into those dark holes like that, it's hard for me to pull myself back up, and it's hard for me to think rationally in a way. So sometimes when I get spiraling down into like a depressive state, it does kind of like I do kind of fantasize of what if I did this? Like, would this work? And I hate to say that because it's kind of sick in a way, but I don't know, my brain is kind of sick in a way, and it's not a really good way to think. But I would be lying if I said I didn't have those ideations.
And so,
So,
is that something that's still recurrent, that's still always present in your life, and now you've just kind of learned to handle it, or has it dissipated some, or?
um, so that happened in 2018, and I did have an ideation back in 2022 when a lot of things were going wrong in my life. And that was the last time that I actually thought about it. Because after that, I did decide to go get professional help. Because once I left the hospital in 2018, I was a loose cannon. So I decided to go to different music festivals, not work. I was spending all my money. I was doing drugs. I took acid damn near every day for a whole summer. And I just was doing all these things that are not helping me, but just giving me, like happiness at the moment, at the time. But it wasn't helping me mentally as a person. So after I kind of went crazy, or not crazy, but like wild and free for a couple years, I decided that I did need to get help because I did hit like another rock bottom type phase for me. Um, so when I thought about the ideation back in 2022, I did call the Veteran Crisis Line, and I was on the phone with them for about 47 minutes before we ended the call. And the VA actually had a really good like follow-up system in place. So it's on record that I did talk to and use the Veteran Crisis Line. They have a third party that takes that information and reaches out to veterans to kind of follow up to make sure, their mindset has changed, they're doing positive things to help themselves. So there was a guy, he was a retired Army veteran, had some injuries and stuff, so he had to be medically retired. So it was someone that I could kind of, build a rapport with who kind of understood the military life. And he would call me once a week for about 8 weeks and just kind of follow up with me, see if I've set any goals, help me set some goals, if I'm reaching my goals, and then of course, are you suicidal? Do you have, the ideas in your head? Have you prepared to do it again? All that um, protocol with the suicide prevention with the military. So I did that.
Mhm.
And then I also did 17 weeks of intensive outpatient dialectic behavior therapy that kind of taught me how to handle different situations with different coping mechanisms. Because not only did I attempt suicide, but another way that I would try to get rid of my mental pain and my emotional pain, I would also self harm. So then, the pain would be physical rather than um, emotional, because I felt like emotional pain is way harder to deal with than actual physical pain. So with that, I did the 17 weeks of dialectic behavior therapy and learned different coping skills. And I think that was really what I needed to do from the beginning. And so once I got that done, like my mindset totally changed and I was actually having a positive outlook on life. I left the state that I was living in and started an all new life, 700 miles away. And now I just feel like I'm doing really good. I haven't thought about suicide since then. So,
It's great.
yeah.
So the suicidal ideation is the suicidal ideation is more. It comes in like waves, or it'll happen. It's not persistent all the time. So like it'll
Right.
come like the last time it happened was a while ago, and then hopefully it never comes again. But it's not something that's
Hmm.
always recurrent. It's not something that's
No.
always there.
I mean, not for me. I feel like maybe for other people it is, but I'm in a much healthier mental state than I was back then. So,
Hmm.
but who's to say that I won't hit another mental crisis and then have the ideation again? So that's like one thing that's always
Right.
kind of lingering is the thought about it only when I'm in like hard situations. And I think that that's the best way to go about it, if that
Right.
makes
So you find that
sense.
it comes more when there's yeah. So you find that it comes more when there's other things going on in your life that are troublesome.
Yeah,
One
yeah.
thing you said, I wanted to backtrack. I wanted to ask you one question about. So you said at one point that you were masking. You were in the beginning that you were hiding the depression, hiding the suicidal ideation, and you were
Mhm.
always smiling. So one of the things that I've learned in this starting this series is that people they call it smiling depression, and so it's like
Mhm.
they intentionally hide the suicidal ideation behind smiles,
Yeah.
like a vector of like cheerfulness or whatever it is. Um, and so, do you find like that was in? Were you doing that intentionally, or do you feel that you were just kind of doing that automatically as like a safeguard? That was one of the big things um, that I've come across and found out that a lot of people like will
I
intentionally.
I think I was doing it intentionally because I didn't want people to worry about me, and it's harder to be in my emotions. So for me to mask it, and put a smiley face on and pretend that I was happy was actually easier, you know, to pretend that I was happy rather than, you know, deal with the pain and people being sympathetic and, oh, it's going to get better, that kind of stuff. So I'm a strong person. I don't like to see people. I don't like for people to see me be weak. And I felt like that if I was showing those emotions, like depression, everything, that I was kind of weak about it. So for me to just, put on my party face and my party hat and go out with my friends and laugh and smile and have a good time, you know, it was just easier to do that rather than show how I truly felt.
And do you think that was to bury or to hide, like kind of hide from the emotions and kind of just disconnect from that feeling, or do you think that it was more of like a perception issue where I just don't want anybody to know that depressed. I don't want anybody to know that I'm suffering. I don't want anybody to know that I'm thinking about killing myself.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically, I didn't want anybody to know any of that. And it was easier for me to not deal with those emotions when I'm out with my friends and ignoring them. Because once I got home and back to reality, that's when I was able to take the mask off and I wasn't smiling and laughing anymore. That's when everything, became more real.
Yeah. And do you feel that back then when you were intentionally hiding that and masking those feelings, do you like did you want help or did you not? Because some people I spoke to said all they wanted was for people to reach out, to talk to them, to help, but there was nobody there. Other people would say, I intentionally hid it because I did not want anybody to know that I was going to do this. I had this plan. I wanted to carry out the plan. I wanted to die. I did not want anybody to save me. So there's kind of both sides of the ship, um, where there's some people that for sure they want someone to help, and then there's other people who want to be left alone, want to carry out their plan.
Yeah, I think I was someone who just wanted to carry out their plan because a lot of times, people who are suicidal, they kind of prep for suicide, like, giving all their stuff away or, not being available and kind of pulling themselves away from the world and reality, basically, where I didn't give any of my stuff away. There really wasn't any signs. I wasn't, you know, depressed in public. I was putting on this, persona that I was happy and, you know, fuck that guy and I can do whatever I want. I'm a strong, independent woman and what's going on with my husband isn't going to affect me when in reality it was. I just didn't want people to see that part. I didn't want them to see me like struggle and think that I'm not a strong person.
Right. And do you think that your situation where obviously your husband was not loyal, do you think that there were other things that led up to the decision and the feelings that you were having before that, prior to that, like maybe early in your life, or was that kind of just like a light switch moment where it just kind of 180 changed your entire life and the way?
Um, it was a light switch moment because this was someone that I had trusted with my entire life, and literally he was living a double life, and I never knew. So just to have someone who was that close to me that I trusted so wholeheartedly do that to me, it was just basically like a light switch moment because then I was looking at myself like, well, what was wrong with me? What was wrong with me being a wife? Was I not enough? That's never something that I've ever questioned myself about. So for that to just happen all of a sudden, um, it just really had me second guessing who I was. So it was more of a light switch moment. It wasn't like a build up to this because everything was perfect. Our marriage was so great. We never fought, we never had arguments. You know, we were best friends and we hung out together all the time. So this was not like a build up to the suicide moment. This was just like a, are you like kidding me? Like my world came crashing down. And I was like, yep, flip the switch on because this it's just insane. It's something that I would read out of a book. That's not something that would actually happen to me. If that makes sense.
More like more reactive, like a reaction to the situation, as opposed to like ruminating on it for X amount of years or weeks or whatever it is. Like, oh, like I can't handle this. I want it to end. This was more just like a reaction.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
And when you were so in those, I mean, maybe maybe you weren't sitting down thinking about it, but in those moments, did you think like before actually trying to do that, did you think about like your parents or like anybody, like the fallout of it, or in that moment were you just so like I'm done, like I need to get out of this, like this is too much?
Yeah. I wasn't thinking about any of that. I just got home. You know, the party was over. My friends went home. I got home. You know, and I was pretty drunk, so the alcohol, it kind of messes with your judgment a little bit, a lot. And so once I got home and like the reality just kind of set back in, I was just like, I'm doing this shit. I don't care. Like I didn't think about my parents. I didn't think about my friends. I just thought about, you know, how I felt about myself as a wife. Like what did I do wrong? Was I not enough? I literally did everything for this man. And I wasn't thinking about my friends or family. I just wanted my pain to just end. I didn't want to deal with it. So there wasn't a whole lot of thought behind it. It was just like, I'm going to do it. And I didn't think about or care about what anybody else thought. It was just my pain. And I wasn't doing it, to hurt all of them. I was doing it for me. So,
Right, right.
you know,
Stop the
there
pain.
was no, there was no time that I was thinking, you know what, my friends and family are going to miss me. Maybe I shouldn't do this. I just tossed them back.
And do you, in those moments, do you think there would have been anything that somebody could have said or done to, like if somebody came knocking on the door, like your best friend came knocking on the door, do you think there's something that somebody could have said or done that would have changed your mind, or do you think in that moment it was 100% set in stone? That's what it was.
Um, I think in that moment it was 100% set in stone. I don't think anybody could have came over and said anything to change my mind. But I mean, if somebody did show up, I wouldn't have done it while they were there. You know,
Right,
I would, did it in the quiet of my privacy and, not do it in front of people or anything like that.
right, right. And so today you feel that you've been able to overcome that, and you haven't had any of these thoughts since. Do you think that's do you think it's something that you've worked on and that you were able to build up like internal strength, and that's the reason why that you
Yeah.
that you haven't had these
Yeah.
feelings anymore?
Yeah. I feel like that is another reason why. And because it broke my dad's heart to know that his daughter, his one and only daughter, was so sad that she tried to take her own life. And so just knowing the pain that I caused him from my attempt, I could not imagine the pain I would have caused if it was successful. So it's more of I don't want to hurt the people around me rather than do I want to get rid of my pain. So I feel like the suicidal ideations and that whole thought process is behind me. And I know in my heart that I would not attempt it again just because I don't want to hurt the people around me.
Right.
So yeah.
Well, it sounds like you're in a much better spot today than you were back then, and you've come a long way. And
Hmm.
going through that process, it sounds like it made you, a really strong person.
Yeah, it definitely has. 100%.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. I think this story is going to help a lot of people. And yeah, thank you for taking the time to share.
Yeah, and I just have to say, utilize the resources like the Veteran Crisis Line. Um, there is help out there, and you're not alone. And every everybody goes through tough shit, but some people just have a harder time of handling it. And I just want people to know, like, if they're contemplating it or thinking about it, don't do it, because you don't realize how much you mean to other people. And I know the pain is hard. I've been there. I wanted it to end, but it's not worth it, because the pain is only temporary and taking your life is permanent. So I just want people to understand that there are resources out there to get help, even if you don't want help from family members or friends, because you don't want them to see you as you're not a strong person. But utilize a veteran crisis line, and then civilians also have a crisis line. I think it's 988. It's worth it. Your life, you're worth it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that people don't realize like the ripple effect that
Right. Yeah.
suicide causes. I mean, people are suffering internally, and maybe they're in a position where they're suffering internally, and they're not able to see the perception of
Mhm.
the outside world. And so like maybe somebody can't see that, oh, if I take, like, I'm suffering so bad right now, if I take my life, it ends my pain. But what does it do? It sends like a shockwave to my orbit, like the people around me. And I don't think that people think about that. Maybe they can't think about that in that moment because they're in so much pain. So
Yeah.
definitely the utilization of the resources around you, and the 988, like you said, the suicide hotline and all that is definitely important.
Hmm.
So, well, thank you so much again. Appreciate you for coming on, and be well.
Thanks. Thanks for having me, Joe. It's nice meeting you.
You as well. Take care.